So yeah, before I start, I just need to say I know what you're all thinking. He's dressed exactly the same as Mark from Envision was this morning. Yeah, wasn't planned very well that one. I saw him walk in, and yeah, I was like, please no. And to those of you who tried to speak to Mark and approached me, sucks to be you. You thought you were getting Mark, and you ended up talking to me for a few minutes. So, but yeah, not Mark. So I am James, and as said, I'm a senior designer from Komodo Digital. And today, I'm here to talk a little bit about prototyping and how we as creatives in this room can use prototyping a little bit to our advantage to connect with some stakeholders. Now, I was talking to someone a few days ago about this talk, and I mentioned, obviously, the word stakeholders, and they were saying, why are you using that word so much? You know, what do you mean by the word stakeholder? So when I say that, what I mean is it's not for just the product team that you're working within. It's not just for the developers. It's not just for the clients. It's not just for the users. It's for anyone who gives a shit about the product that you're creating. I think that prototyping something, it's something that is overlooked quite a lot. You know, we need to use it a bit more. So that's why I want to talk about it today. And I want to start with the quote that I used in the excerpt of this talk. Now, it's one that I'd love to be able to take credit for, but I can't. It's from the folks at IDEO, and it's, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, a prototype is worth 1,000 meetings. And when you think about that, I like it because it says so much, you know, like that, especially that 1,000 meetings. If you start to add up the time, you know, we've been in meetings before, you've got a lot of heads in the room, the time starts to add up, and it starts to become quite cost heavy. Like I say, we've all been there. We've been sitting in a meeting, going round and round in circles, trying to figure out if a feature or a piece of functionality should be part of a product. When in reality, a quick prototype put together, put in front of some people, can be all that you need to either push a decision through, or if you're stuck in this instance here, with the product managers making some decisions, you can shoot it down. I've probably lost a few friends in that room straight away with that, but so be it. So first, I'd like to go through a bit of why we should prototype. And I think the main reason that we should prototype is because we want to get our product into the best possible state. Now, that state might not be perfect, but it's going to be better than it was previously if we hadn't have created a prototype, ran it past some people, and got their feedback. And the reason that we prototype is because we don't ever get things right the first time. You know, we're working with complex problems. We need to make sure that we get people's feedback and they can understand the problem, and then we can go from there. It's not as simple as if I was to build a fence, for example. If I was to build a fence, I know exactly point A and point B. I know how long this fence needs to be, and I know how tall this fence needs to be. And that's great. I can, from that, determine how many panels I need. I go and buy them, I put the fence up, and I get it right first time. Which is great, because the last thing I want to do is to have to go back, dig out all the concrete posts, you know, put the fence back down, and start over again. When we're working with humans, with people, with customers, with users, it's not that simple. So we can use prototyping to start to get things right bit by bit, you know, piece by piece, so that we can slowly start to build this fence, build the product, and get to the right place. Another reason why we should use prototyping is it can be used at any point during a project. It's one of those things where it's really flexible, and I'll go through some of them bits in a moment, but it can be used at any point, and it fits into that wider kind of design thinking methodology, I guess. So you can go into that process where you'll build something, you run it past some users, you'll get their feedback, you'll iterate on that and fix it in a new iteration, and that's great. It also helps to save time and effort. You know, you've got the whole time and effort as money. So if I was to prototype early on, as early as possible, with something like a paper prototype, I can get that feedback straight away firsthand. And that's going to be a lot less effort, a lot less time, than if I was to go through and create some high-fidelity prototypes and put them in front of users, you know? And then even still, again, the last thing you want is to get to the very end, have something built, have some live code, put it in front of people, and they go, this isn't what I wanted, this isn't what I asked for, this isn't how we would use this thing. So at that point, you're into that kind of cost of failure where you've got to go back, you've got to start again, you've got to rip the fence up. But that's not to say you need to prototype as early as possible. Like, a prototype technically could be something that is work and something that is live code. And that's absolutely fine. You've just got to be careful with how you pick and choose what and how and where you prototype. Ultimately, we want to use a prototype to investigate and learn how our stakeholders think and feel about a product, you know. We want to put something in front of them. We want to get their feedback. We want to explore some themes. And we want to inspire, because sometimes all it takes is for somebody to see something working in progress for them to really get it. You know, instead of sitting there and trying to explain something, just showing them something sometimes makes a massive difference. So how can we prototype? Now, if I was to stand up here and ask everybody in this room what the first thing is that comes to their mind when I say prototyping, we're probably going to have a really mixed bag of answers. And that's because it can be such a wide range of things, you know. But ultimately, to me, it comes down to two things, and that's the fidelity of the prototype and the type of the prototype. So fidelity, I'm talking more about the look and the feel of the prototype, you know, like how it comes out. The type is more what you're trying to solve with that prototype, what you're trying to understand from the user, what you're trying to test, ultimately. First, I'll go through the fidelity. So, as you can see here, a prototype can be anything from a really low fidelity sketch all the way up to our hi-fis and our mock-ups. And like I said before, it can even be further than that. It can be a built piece of code, and it can be a bit more obscure things, you know. It could be something you build something with some Lego bricks and put it in front of people. You could also do a role-playing prototype, you know, where you'll act out a certain scenario and gauge how people feel that. But jumping back to this, you know, sketching can be great. Get some paper, sketch out some quick ideas. If you're designing an app, for example, you could cut out a phone screen. You could use that as storyboard out something really quick and simple and put it in front of someone to gauge an initial flow and see if that's going to work. Moving on a bit, you've got your kind of mid-fi, your grayscales, your wireframes. Again, if that's what you need to do to test, go and do that. But you've got to be careful. You know, the higher you move up this scale, the more nuanced bits of feedback you're going to get. So I guess we've probably all had the feedback when you've put some wireframes in front of someone, why is it all grey? So you've got to go through that and you've got to explain, well, it's not the final product. And you get the same thing when you get up the further end, you know, when you're putting actual style designs in front of people, you'll get more nuanced feedback, which might not be what you're wanting to test. So you've got to be careful with that, you know. You're going to get, I don't like that font, I don't like that color, I don't like that icon. So you've got to be careful. So that's the kind of the fidelity of the prototype. So let's switch over to the types of prototype. Now, Jacob Nielsen published a paper back in the 80s, I think it was, and he outlined 3 different types of prototypes, and I think it was a really nice way of describing what prototypes can be. And he mentioned vertical prototypes, horizontal prototypes, and scenarios, which I'll go over now. So let's imagine this square here, or rectangle, is a product with features and functionality. If I was to create a horizontal prototype, that is a prototype where it's going to have very limited functionality, but it might show a broad range of features. So this can be something like I'm walking people through the main navigation of an application, for example, showing them how all the features link together and how they work. And this can be used like in the early phase of a project, I guess, you know, so just to gauge and see how this is going to work, run the user through the main nav and understand the range of abilities across an application, for example. The flip side of that is our vertical prototypes. So they are literally concentrating on one specific feature and going really deep into the functionality of that. So taking the user down a path, down a certain flow, to make sure that they can use it correctly and make sure that they understand everything. Now, a scenario is what you described as the intersect between the two. So that's where they come together. And you can say, maybe I have a prototype where there's a couple of different features that are really closely intertwined. They link up really well. So I want to put that in front of people. I want to test that. But I only want to go not as deep into the functionality of it. So these are great ways to prototype. So when you take a step back and you see that you've got such a wide range of types of prototypes, you know, through the types, through the fidelity, it can get a bit bogged down. You know, you've got so much that you can think about. So what you've got to be really careful about is selecting that right fidelity and setting the expectations. So, like I said, with there being such a variety, you've got to be careful. So it wouldn't make sense spending weeks, months on a prototype if it's just something that's going to get binned or something that might not actually make it in the final product and it's something really random that you want to test out. And also setting expectations, so it can be time consuming. So when you are creating a prototype and when you put that prototype in front of people, make sure you communicate with them and say, look, this is not a representation of the final product. It's just something to test it out, just something to gauge your opinion, get some feedback, and for us to ultimately improve what we're doing. And that avoids any communication issues, Secondly, make use of tooling. We're very lucky these days that we've got so many different things that we can use to prototype with, I've put Envision up there because I know that we had Mr. Envision talking this morning. Unfortunately, he's not here. I even dressed like him, and it still didn't work. But Envision's something that we use loads. So, if you've got something higher fidelity, you can quickly link everything up, get it into Envision, put it in front of some users, and you can get some really good feedback straight away. You've got things like Marvel, where they've got a really nifty phone app. So you can sketch out some wireframes, take some pictures with the phone, link it up there and then, and put it in front of people and get some feedback. Figma, Sketch, they've all got prototyping features now built into them. We're really lucky to have access to these things. And you can even take a prototype a step further with something like Maze, where you can take an Envision prototype, dump it into Maze, outline a happy path for your users to go through, send it out to people and test if that path is working, and you can get some really good feedback from that stuff. So another thing to bear in mind is involving as many of the right people as possible, You spend a lot of time prototyping, you spend a lot of time designing, and you've got this where you don't want it to get shot down. The last thing you want is to go in and have someone just absolutely shoot down this idea you've been working on. But that's the whole point. Don't be scared of putting something in front of people and for them to say, no, this isn't right, this shouldn't be like this. That's absolutely fine. And by involving other people, you're kind of fostering like emotional investment, I guess, in that product in a way. So they're going to feel like they've been part of the process of designing it. They're going to be a bit more emotionally invested, and they're going to want it to succeed. But the key thing here is the right people. You've got to involve the right people to get the right feedback. If you're just going to sit in front of a load of yes men and they're going to say, yeah, this is absolutely brilliant, then that's not what you want from a prototype. You want to put it in front of people who are going to challenge. So invite that person to the meeting who you absolutely hate because they shoot down all your designs. Get them in. Also, use real content. So too many times as designers, we're shoving a load of lorem ipsum and we hope that everything's going to be all right. But most of the time, that's not the case. You need to have the context readily available there for the users so that they can understand what the prototype's about, And like the meme here, it's got no context, it's just all lorem ipsum. And that's something that we really need to bear in mind. Be okay with your prototype not being complete. It doesn't have to be complete. If you were going to try and prototype out the full product that you've created, it's not going to work, Yes, they can be high fidelity, but they don't have to be perfect. I've got the example of this half-drawn horse up there because it's exactly what a prototype can be. You could have a prototype of the back end here, where it's high fidelity, it looks great, and you can run that past users. But you could also have a prototype of the really poorly drawn front end, and that's fine. Like put the front end in front of people, get them to give feedback on that. And like I say there, it doesn't have to be complete. And a really good example, yes, I'm going to be that guy who uses an example of Steve Jobs in a design talk. It doesn't have to be complete. And a great example of something not being complete was when Steve Jobs first unveiled the iPhone. It was something that it was plagued with bugs. It wasn't actually meant to be a prototype. It was meant to be a live demo. It was plagued with bugs. And what he was doing was taking a happy path through, because he knew exactly where to click and where to go so that this wasn't going to crash. And ultimately, that ended up becoming a really good prototype. It got the investment from the people in the room. Everybody absolutely loved it. And then the iPhones became the raving success it is now. And that's a great example of something not being complete. But if you walk someone through something in the right way, then they're going to really get it and they're going to understand it. Yet, like I say, something like that wouldn't work for user testing specifically. But if you're just trying to get an idea across, then that would be great. And also, tell a story with your prototype. So this is where you've really got to connect with your users, it could be like by nature we're very visual people, you know, we need something in front of us in order to understand it. Like I say, sometimes it only takes somebody to see something to really get it. And a really good example of somebody telling a story with this is, again, IDEO. I seem like a fanboy of IDEO, mentioned them twice. But they did the Elmo's Monster Maker app, which is the example that you can see on there. Now, this is a really old example. I think this is like, well, I say really old. It's 11 years old. But I think it's a brilliant example of how prototyping is something that it's still very relevant today, you know, and it's something that we should use. So what they did was these two that are on screen here, they had a really good idea about a piece of functionality that should be in the application. So they were like, right, we want something cool where kids can tap on the nose of Elmo whilst you're creating your monster, and he'll do a fun little dance. And they explained this just as I have there, and everyone's sitting there going, what? Like, that's not going to work, that's not going to fly. No one was buying into it. It was going to get cut from the application completely. So they were like, right, how do we do this? So they ended up coming up with a prototype. They had an hour to create a prototype. So what they did was what you can see on screen. They printed out a massive iPhone. They cut a hole in the screen, and they got this chap to stand behind it and act out exactly what happens when you touch his nose. And what came of it was a really cheesy prototype. Like, it's horrendous, but it works. You know, it got the message across. By him dancing, the whole team understood exactly what the feature should be, and it ended up being something that actually made it into the final product. Now, unfortunately, it's not there on the App Store anymore, but it's a great example of how a prototype and just showing things to people can make them really get it. I'm going to put that off now because I know that it's a bit much. So to summarize, like, what does prototyping result in? It's going to result in a better product, ultimately. Now, when I say a better product, it's going to be better than it was had you not have prototyped. But also, when I say better, I mean it's going to be more tailored, more fit for purpose, you know? You've run it past some users or with some stakeholders, with the people that you're building it with to get some more information out of them, and you're building something better. It gets everyone on board. It gets everyone who gives a shit about the product on board, whether that's the users, whether that's your team that you're working with. And that's a really valuable thing, you know? You want people to feel like they've been part of that process, and it's really important. It saves time and effort, as I mentioned before, really simple. Keep it fast and loose, you know, prototype early on in the process, get it out the way with fail early, and that's what you really need to do to save the time and effort and the costs, make your bosses happy. And then finally, and I think this is an important one, it gives us, as the creatives in the room, the confidence that what we are creating is something that is fit for purpose. We know that we're on the right track. If we were just to go with our instincts and just put something out there that we thought was best fit, it might not be the case. And that is it from me. So I've put my Twitter handle up on the screen there, along with Komodo Digital's. Feel free to follow me, but do be warned, my tweets are usually just me whinging. I think my latest tweets are me having a kick-off at British Airways. There's Newcastle United tweets in there, if any of you are interested in football. And there's the odd bit of design chucked in there. But if you want something a bit more serious, follow Komodo Digital. We've got all the great content on there, and also head along to our website where we've got loads of blogs on prototyping and other things, design and development. So that's it from me. Thank you very much.
James, thank you. We've got 2 minutes. Do you want to sit down? Sure. Right, we've got about 5 minutes. We've managed to grab back a bit of time. Just fire a couple of questions at you, and then we'll go and get some coffee. You've been listening, obviously, today, and one of the themes that's coming up has been this work-life balance and how things have changed in the pandemic. What were the main challenges for you and what you do in your job during the pandemic, and what kind of learned from that, if you like?
Yeah, it's been interesting because obviously with everything being office-based, you know, originally we had adapted in a certain way, and one of the things that we do a lot at Komodo is running workshops. So one of the big challenges that we had over the pandemic was, how do we take something which is predominantly an in-person thing? You know, it's quite like you get people in, you do the whole workshop thing, you go for lunch together. It's a really personal experience. How do you translate that into something that works the same way and you get the same results over the internet, you know? So we've had to really adapt to that and start running workshops through things like Miro, for example, where you can, it's like an online whiteboard.
So explain what that is.
Yeah, it's an online whiteboard basically for, I'm sure there's many people, everyone know Miro? Yeah.
Okay.
Miro, I don't know how everyone pronounces it, everyone likes to call it different. But yeah, we've had to adapt and take our process out of real life, if you like, and put it into a Google Hangout and a digital whiteboard. So that's been quite challenging, but it's something that we had to adapt to really quickly. You know, it was quite quick and snappy when the pandemic hit and everyone was like, oh shit, we've got to work from home. So it was a really quick turnaround to figure out how we can do that, and it's been interesting, yeah.
And will you change the way you've worked since then? Because obviously we've heard from Julian and we've heard from Hella about the differences in different cultures and different countries and how they've dealt with it. I'm not going to ask you to come down because it's not black and white and it's not binary, but where would you kind of be on that kind of, I suppose, that landscape of the kind of working pattern or life that you would have post-pandemic?
Yeah, it's in terms of how we do things as a company and how the work's changed, like not too much. We've just had to adapt it to, like I say, be digital. But yeah, in terms of like personally, we've recently just moved office, so we've got a brand new office space which is opening up. Well, I'm going to get told off for calling it an office. It's a studio.
You have ping pong tables?
No, but someone is pushing for a pool table, which we're directors on
softball pits and things.
Yeah,
like
we're trying. But yeah, so it's going to be interesting to have that balance now. You know, we're still going to be ultimately remote, but we've now got a really nice space that we can go in and use. So it's going to be good to be able to dip into that every so often.
And Mark, your twin, touched on that communal language and getting that communal community between designers and engineers. Do you have any kind of advice and tips on that? Do you find that is easy?
It's one of those where I think it's always been difficult. There's always that, like, there cannot be that hard stop. You know, you can't just have design stop, hand over the development. There needs to be the crossover there, and that's something which I think's always been difficult no matter what. And it's became even more so with the pandemic and being remote. So yeah, the only advice I can give is just to, well, have more meetings, you know, like get people on the calls more, you know, run people through things more. Yeah, people hate me for saying that, but it's communication ultimately. Do you know what I mean? Whether it doesn't have to be meetings, but whether it might be putting a prototype together, for example, to run someone through some functionality of this is exactly how I want this thing to work, build it this way. And yeah, that'll definitely help.
Okay, and you're around for the next couple of days.
I am,
tomorrow, so we can approach James and ask him lots of questions. Thank you so much. We're going to have a break now. We're bang on time, actually. What if we come back at 4:10, and then we will fire through with our next couple of speakers to 5:30, if that's okay. So we'll see you back here, 4:10. Fabulous. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks, James. Great.